What's up, everybody? It's William Collier, and this is episode 16 of the Ground Podcast. I've got a really big announcement for you. You might have noticed it's been a long time since the last episode was aired. That is because I am going through a major rebranding, or I guess you could say unbranding. I'm going to be focusing on my personal brand, on the name William Collier, and all of my efforts are just going to be front-facing that way. It's just going to be what you see is what you get. I'm going to be doing coaching for ethical businesses and nonprofits. I'm going to be focusing on my branding and marketing acumen and helping people build their own businesses from the ground up. I have a lot of experience with that, and as such, I've just found that I'm clouding things up with a lot of these other efforts that I have. So the Cathedral Project is not going away. This idea still exists. It's something that I really want to continue to develop, and I think it has the potential to be a movement. But for the time being, for the sake of my livelihood and for my family, I'm just going to be focusing on those efforts. And that said, if you are listening and you are getting a brand off the ground, you're starting a business and you just don't know where to start, I would be happy to jump on a free call with you. Feel free to use my calendar link I'm going to provide in the show notes. You know, one thing I've discovered in myself personally is that my business and my livelihood has so much more to do with my identity than I ever thought. You know, I'm an Enneagram 4, if we have any Enneagram people out there. And that means that I'm the individualist, that I have this yearning to find out who I am really and to express myself as fully and authentically as possible. And I know that in this world, where it can be so hard to get ahead and to really feel like we're living into where practicality and passion like cross over in a fulfilling way for us, it can be really hard to find a center. And not only that, but it can be hard to even identify what the self is in the first place. So yes, I can offer a lot in terms of building a business from the ground up. I've done it before. I've done it a few times. And yes, I have a lot to offer in terms of graphic design skills, the human element, branding and identity as a strength, like a core strength of mine. But we have to start a lot of times with what are the limiting beliefs that we are bringing into the space when we try to start a business? What are the things we think about money, the things we think about ourselves? And so often coming from Western culture with, you know, this indoctrination of self that just is looked at as evil and wretched and sinful and separate from God, we have a lot of baggage we carry into this space, and it can really hold us back. So that's where I want to help you out. Feel free to schedule a free consult in the link that I'm going to provide in the show notes. And I'd love to get to know you better and find out your brand story and see if we are a fit for one another. Okay, that said, today's guest is none other than Esther Joy Goetz. Esther asked to be introduced as a wife for over 3 decades, a mom to 4 adult kids, a spiritual director, author, and podcast host of the Deconstructing Mamas Podcast. I think you're going to really love what Esther has to say. She was very insightful and just really brought a lot of big mama bear energy into this interview. So if you're in this kind of deconstructing, reconstructing, reconfiguring faith space where you're jumping into an expansive Christianity with us, I think you're going to really enjoy the following interview from Esther Joy Goetz. Esther Goetz, thank you so much for joining us on the Ground Podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me, William. This is so exciting for me. I have been looking forward to this for a while.
Oh, good. So have I. I've been really fascinated at this community that's starting to kind of rise up. I've noticed there's a lot more people talking about this topic that we're going to jump into in a minute, about the deconstruction element of faith, of coming out of a kind of fundamental Christian spirituality. So I was really pleased to find you guys. Just searched on the podcast app and found you and was immediately intrigued. You want to tell the listeners a little bit about what it is that you guys talk about on Deconstructing Mamas?
Oh, sure. It is interesting that you do that. And that is one of the reasons why we chose that specific name, was Deconstructing Mamas, so people could find us, which is great that worked for you.
Yeah.
Basically, I think what you alluded to was the community that's beginning to rise and has risen probably pretty heavily since 2020. And when my co-host and I, Liz Enns Petters, were looking for podcasts for our own journeys, there wasn't any. And so we had a little book club. Here's the origin story. We had a little book club during COVID. We were reading Glennon Doyle's Untamed. And she came to me and she said, would you ever want to do a podcast? But I don't want it to just be a evolving faith podcast, which was what I called deconstruction, where you're allowed to have questions and doubts and wonderings about your faith, and then go on a journey to dismantle it, unravel it, and then probably rebuild that according to your own values and desires and hopes.
Yeah.
But the caveat was, what do we do as parents?
Yeah.
We know there's a lot of things going on around out there about what we do as people, but what do we do for our kids? I have grown kids, she has young kids, and we said, let's talk about this one area. How do we have this evolving faith? We've maybe harmed our kids already. We're moving through it. What do we do now? We have no blueprint like we did in fundamentalist, what I call high control religion. We knew exactly what to do with our kids and when we had to do it.
Yeah.
And now we're sort of like, what do we do now? So that's what we talk about. And the funniest thing we've discovered is it has been a lot about reparenting ourselves.
Yeah.
Giving to ourselves what we did not have in high control religion, and then being able to pass that along as we're learning it. So that's kind of where we go with what we do on that podcast.
Oh, it's beautiful. I love the parenting ourselves thing. That's coming up a lot too. It's something that I think not to go too far down the rabbit hole, but the generation that came before us really, for all the things they did well, they really didn't know themselves very well. And so parenting ourselves now has become a self-discovery journey, and it's so necessary right now. So good work. I also saw through another interview that you did that you're kind of transitioning into a spiritual director role. So what does that look like for you right now? What are you doing? Yeah,
so exactly what you just said. Those two things are not contrary to each other. They are exactly the same as each other. I'm called Esther the Dalai Mama, believe it or not, in my own space.
That's perfect.
And it is my author and spiritual direction space. And it is helping people to reparent themselves. But mostly it is to uncover, this is my little tagline, uncover what's been hidden, recover what's been wounded, and discover what we've lost about ourselves. So it is the idea of giving ourselves what we did not have growing up. Finding ourselves. We don't even know who we are because we were told who we should be. So asking the question, who am I before the world told me who I should be? And then the spiritual part of that is, how is this connected to my spirituality, to the divine, to God? If to whatever I deem God to be, I have become more of a process theologian, and we'll talk about that in a little while, where God is a verb and not a noun. So, but everybody's allowed to have what it is. And my job is to help you discover what it is inside of you. So they're not so different from each other, right?
No, that is a really good way to say it. Yeah, I love the idea of those two things being linked, because, I mean, most of us who have deconstructed are Rob Bell fans. Are you a Rob Bell fan? Okay.
I am a Rob Bell fan.
Yeah. The idea that he kind of showed all of us at this seminal moment of the word spiritual not even appearing in the Hebrew text, because all things are spiritual. So of course your spiritual direction is tied to everything, including reparenting yourself and finding your identity. Before the world told you who you were, I want to touch on that. So the part of the world that told us who we were, that we're most interested in, is the church and this controlling structure that you were alluding to a minute ago. So speaking of that, I want to talk about your faith background a little bit, if you're cool with that, if you're comfortable with it. And you can go as deep as you want, as far back as you want, but I think it'll help people to understand how you've arrived where you are now for the work that you're doing.
Yeah. So I'm a missionary kid, so it couldn't be any more all-encompassing. My entire family's mission was to save people from hell through their acceptance of what we would say in fundamentalist evangelical Christianity of Jesus as your savior. And my grandparents were also missionaries, so it isn't just, it's baked into my DNA, my genetic code at this point. And I was told, and I believed fully, that I was responsible for the saving of souls from hell. That was really my main job as a person living on the planet. And I was also told at a very young age that I had the gift of evangelism. I might have the gift of passion and evangelism in that I'm trying to convince people of things, but it was limited to keeping people out of hell and this very narrow focus of keeping people out of hell. I got a lot of people, quote unquote, saved in my high school, my public high school. Once we came home from the mission field, I lived here.
Doing God's work.
Was doing God's work. I continued in that mode through my young adulthood, even at work, had a Bible study, got a bunch of people saved. I mean, it was just this major agenda I had for every single person I met. And that's kind of my faith. It seeped into my my early marriage and early parenting. I remember saying to my husband, the reason we should have kids will be there will be more praisers of God in the world. I mean, it was only about whether or not more people were going to go to heaven than hell by having children. I think some descriptor words in all of that were, and I'm sure you've heard this, certain, right, pure, only, othering, insiders, exclusive. That was probably the main idea, was that we had the answers for everybody in the world. So that's kind of my faith background. I like to talk about it in terms of words and ideas that surrounded it, more than like the nitty gritty of how did I get this person to, through this 4 spiritual laws, to know they're separated from God, jump over on that cross picture. And so that was me. And I still am very passionate, but hopefully heading in a much more inclusive and open and curious direction. So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I love that. You know, I've found that there are ways that you don't even realize that your consciousness has been sculpted by the stuff that you've been taught. And so while you might feel like, you know, you're in a more wide open space, you still have behavior patterns. You still have actions that pop out. You still have things that you say here and there, and you catch yourself and you go, do I even really, what was that? You know, it's a conditioning that takes place, and it's a powerful cocktail. It is some strong Kool-Aid, you know, that we drink, that fundamental evangelical thing, because if you talked about passion, if you tie it to passion and you actually do have a good intention to try to do something good for the world, then that passion and that momentum in your life can be harnessed, and not always in the best way for the best end result. So I level with that big time. I level with that a lot.
Yeah, I think it's just the core need, I think, of human beings to belong to something. And when you find a space where you do belong, like I talked about the inside word, and I was birthed belonging into that, it does couple with our actual human need to belong.
Yeah.
And so it gets very, very sticky. We do have a basic human need of belonging, and then put that alongside of, wow, you're already in the in club.
Yeah.
And your job is to get other people into this in club. It feels so good, so right. And so it's not anything that we're doing innately terrible.
Right.
But it turns very toxic. It's not innately terrible, but it does quickly turn to a toxic.
Yeah.
mind.
You know, it's so funny. Like, the main agent for my deconstruction was Jesus Christ. You know,
The original deconstructor.
yeah. And man, it's just, you know, you just talked about being inside, but like, these heavy yokes and this, Jesus was always saying, you think you're in, but you're not. And
Right.
you're outside, but I'm bringing you in. And we keep falling into that tribal pattern of wanting to belong. And it's baked into us, and not all of it's so bad, right? Which leads us to the idea of family. When we have a family, we're biological creatures who express our genes and have children, and that's a good thing, for our development as a species. So speaking about family, I know you identify really strongly with this mother role, and you've really already touched on that and really exhibited that through your words. I think it's so beautiful. I really am so glad you're here, because you're a female. You're a voice of the feminine side, and I need so much more of that. So thank you again for coming on. Speaking of that, as a mother in this kind of belonging structure of family, deconstructing as a woman, I'm just curious, are there any sort of perspectives or differences that you've noticed coming from your perspective, say with some of the stuff that's been put on you by church, some of the identity markers that the doctrines tend to put on women? Mm-hmm. How has this looked for you going through this process as a mother and as a woman specifically?
Yeah, I just want to address the whole, like, even my own particular family structure, like having come from my family of origin, and then now I have 4 kids who are, I call them grownish and flownish, because that's how it is. Yeah. They're around more often than not. But I think this idea of belonging, the way that it was for me in my family of origin, is that you belong as long as you behave. As long as we have uniformity. What I've taken into my parenting, and I'm so grateful for this, the deconstructing, the unpacking of that real horrible message, I would say, that I was given, or that I actually imparted as well for a time, is you belong no matter what. It is about harmony and unity, not uniformity. Yeah. It is about diversity. In unity. We do not belong because we are all the same. And I write, kind of my day job where I make my money, this is kind of fun, is I write in a space for moms of teens and young adults. I do some author work there, and trying to switch the mindset of actually every person has the right to become themselves and to be themselves. And that is my mission, that I love my kids unconditionally. I give them the roots of unconditional love, but I give them the wings of freedom to be completely themselves. Yeah. And I say, a bag of trail mix is a lot more fun to eat than a bag of peanuts, right? It's not that you belong because we're all the same and we're uniform in our thoughts. So yeah, it's that, again, that idea of belonging. And then you brought up the whole feminine aspect. I think as a mom, as a woman, being able to sort of give, quote unquote, birth to something new, something different, with what I did, breaking the cycle of a past family structure or idea or inclusion to this new possibility of harmony and not uniformity, and still having unity. And the basis of that unity is love and belonging, and unconditional love and belonging. And yeah, I feel very thankful to be a woman. Yesterday, I have a little book club that I was telling you is The Origin. We still meet, even though it's 5 years later, 4 years later. And I said to them, would any of you guys want to be a man? And we were like, as hard as it's been to be a woman, or as, say, the oppression in Christianity and toxic religion, none of us would give that up. None of us would want to not have the ability to say, be a mother, not in necessarily the physical sense, but in more that spiritual sense. The joke in my family is, Mom, you're the mom to the world. Like, you are you just want to mother everybody. And it is more of calling into life and calling people to become themselves and rooting for them, supporting them, and cheering them on. Yeah. If that makes sense.
It does. Oh, it's awesome. Yeah, we have an opportunity, I think, kind of hidden in the mess of the modern world, how interconnected and digital we are, to really actually start to reform a village of sorts. And I'm always so stricken with this idea because of how isolated we've become in so many ways, that what we're really missing out on is the mothering and the fathering between families in a village structure. So I think there's an opportunity with how interconnected we're becoming to reclaim some of that. And I think we can put a flag on the ground for you, Esther, that's you're living into your purpose right now. It's really cool to watch.
Well, and I think the exciting piece to that too is that we all have the divine feminine and masculine within us. Mm-hmm. And yet we were shoved into these boxes. And my husband and I have learned to embrace our inner masculine, me, and his inner feminine. And in fact, he and I are those people I call myself a manly girl, if that makes sense. I've always been, and he's always been a girly man. Yeah. And we're okay now that we can be embracing the full, what that means fully. He can call to life and bring forth and cheer people on. That's not limited to me just because I have a uterus.
Yeah. I like to joke with my wife though, that like, I am so jealous of how literal so much of the idea of birthing and creating is for a woman, because I'm an artist myself. So there's like an embodied feeling behind it. There was I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but there was a Episcopal priest, I think it was Episcopal, Robert Farrar Capon, pretty progressive theologian, who talked about the womb of the word. And these images are so important, I think, for men to try to understand, because it is the human experience. This is a human thing, and it's such a powerful metaphor for what we're doing here, what's being birthed, and what the process looks like, and what we can leave behind, and what is actually the baby that we take with us and don't throw out with the bathwater, necessarily. Yeah. Okay. So this is beautiful stuff. I want to get into what it looks like to parent through deconstruction. Because I know that a lot of people who are in this space, one of the scariest things is going to be the feeling that there's no more morality. Like there's some kind of a ground that disappears beneath them, right? Which is an ironic thing to say with the Ground podcast that you're on right now. We're trying to give people a sense of some solid ground, so they don't feel that an existential fear that keeps them from taking the next step. I've heard it said that you'll know you're on the right path when the path disappears. And that's a scary idea for a lot of people. So speaking of morality, has that been something that's been difficult for you to wrestle with in this process? Or what kind of views do you have on it as you parent after, say, a deconstruction and reconstruction of faith?
Yeah, I like your word grounding. I like that this is a grounded podcast. I think that we just had the wrong space that we were grounded in. And I think that is a very holy word. I think that's a very sacred word. I don't want to get rid of it. That's not a baby I'm throwing out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
I just think that we had it in a place of external authority instead of internal authority.
Yeah.
And that is obviously what I do in my spiritual direction practice, coming alongside of people and having them move from this place of external authority, we're only grounded in this narrow external space, to more of an internal space. What actually do you find? What portals to your own soul do you find that ground you? Is it nature? Is it shadow work? Is it music? Is it poetry? Is it writing? Is it guided imagery? Is whatever art forms? Is it a soul collage? Whatever it is out there, what keeps you, even really heavy duty discussions around process theology. I love that stuff.
Oh yeah.
But I would say that grounding is really huge. And then if we bring that into parenting, right? That word grounding, our kids need to be grounded.
Yeah.
They need a safe space to explore and discover.
Yeah.
And I know two of the big hot button issues, and are things surrounding sex. Purity culture is a big one that everybody's like, what do we do with this? What kind of, what do we do now that we don't have black and white thinking around this topic.
Mm.
What do we do now that's not like abstinence only till marriage? All this fear comes in because we don't have like we feel untethered, ungrounded, unrooted, whatever kind of word you want to say. And I know for me in that particular space, it's the shift of focus, again, from external to internal. The idea of consent and respect, and the focus going from don't have sex till you're married to, hey, what's going on with consent? What do you want to do? What do you want to have others? What are others allowed to do it to you? And what respectfully would you like to do with others? And then it's like a communion of two that get to decide together what they want to do going forward. And it comes from having choice and freedom. And it's not all about everything I want to do.
Yeah.
It's actually a holy communion between two where they discover what works for them. And there has to be both. And that comes from them both having internal authority instead of external authority.
Yeah.
I can say no, I can have boundaries, I can say yes. And so this is the major shift of focus, again, from external to internal, would be something I would say regarding sex. So that is that like shift from purity culture to consent and respect. Just the focus is very, very different. And then I think the bigger thing, I think the place I have changed and shifted where the ground felt very shaky was the idea that we are bad to we are good.
Yeah.
And that morally depraved, reprehensible, filthy rags and all that stuff that we get from high control religion, we're bad and need to be fixed or saved, to we're divinely imprinted as humans. So we have dirt and divinity. We have, holy humanity, all of those things. And we are good and have needs that have every right to be met.
Yeah.
If you take that into your parenting, it shifts everything.
Oh, yeah.
It shifts it all. A 3-year-old's not having a tantrum because they're a wicked sinner. They might be hangry. They might be lonely. They might need to go to bed. They might need you to gather them up into their arms, or they might need to just self-soothe. We don't know. Versus they need to be spanked, set aside, punished, violently, all of that stuff, because they just have a human need that needs to be met. And that's good. It's good. Yeah. It's not bad that even just the word mine when they're 2. I mean, I tried to get rid of that out of my kids because I was told it was so evil and terrible. And actually, it's a developmental stage where they're differentiating between you and them. And they can't even do that till they're 2. They think their nose and your nose are the same nose in the mirror. So it's just that idea, the shift of our kids are bad. The 2 books, I would say, the resources I have, my favorite book on the subject for adults is by my spiritual director, Danielle Schroyer, called Original Blessing. And then a parenting book called Good Inside by Dr. Becky Kennedy. And it just kind of opens you up to viewing your kid fundamentally different than perhaps you were taught to view yourself. And boy, there's a lot of reparenting there.
So what I hear you saying is you probably shouldn't just sit them in front of Veggie Tales for 2 hours a day and
Well, I don't know. It kind of worked for my kids in some way. No, yes. Oh, it's so funny unpacking Veggie Tales because my kids still love Veggie Tales. I mean, they're older, but they have so many good memories around that, which is also kind of like sad in a way that the good memories get to be taken away, but the toxic messages even in it are crazy.
Oh yeah. They're all throughout it. And they know how to write a hook. You know what I'm saying? Those are some hooky songs, man. I'll never forget.
Well, that guy is very creative, Eric Metaxas. He's a very, very creative man who's kind of, I don't know. That's all I'm going to say. You can look him up. Very effective.
Very effective. Yeah. Well, but speaking of which, it's you talked about high control religion. It's so funny. When I was writing out the plan for our interview here and was thinking about morality, I thought immediately of purity culture and then kind of struggled to call almost anything up aside from violence or whatever. Like, I feel like it's so obvious, like the tribal markers, in the times of the ancient Hebrew, like that was circumcision. That's a sexual marker for what a Hebrew male is. And then a virgin, there's a very obvious anatomical sign for whether a woman is a virgin or not. And then those two coming together and being Hebrew, like, it is very controlled, and it all centered around sexuality, or at least a huge part of it did.
Yes.
So it's really no surprise that has, continued and proliferated into Christianity as well. It's just more of an ideological, psychological sort of game that's played to keep us in the Christian tribe. So yeah, I mean, those messages, my wife and I have had to work through so many blocks in our just sexual relationship because of that psychological warfare that was loosed on us as teenagers. So it's, my son, my oldest, you talked about being grownish and flownish. He's a sophomore at OSU in Corvallis. And, he had some of this spill over onto him that we're working through with him. And he's a very loving and open person, but, he's got his own worldview. And that's a whole other topic, letting them fly, letting them make their own decisions, and not necessarily loving and agreeing with every single one of them. Which kind of leads me to the drama in relationships, like through deconstruction, through moving through this process. You talked about in your family of origin, uniform. As long as things were uniform, everything was good. I know that these are sensitive topics, so I won't ask you to divulge exactly what's happened to you in your life, but I just would say, is there any way that you can give comfort to people who are going through this? What are some lessons that you learned as you dealt with some of that drama, and with friends and with family members?
Yeah. So the interesting thing enough is I went from being like the golden child to the black sheep at this point, and that's just kind of what happens a lot for people. And I think that is what is so scary for people going through this. Everybody's like, oh, I think you just want to sin and have a debaucherous lifestyle. I'm like, literally, I'm just going to bed now. And I'm like walking in the woods on a silent meditation,
Yeah.
But I think that loss of community and belonging is huge. And that happens both in extended family, with friendships. One of the hardest things for me, having been a leader in that world for so long, was the loss of respect.
Yeah.
So many people. I mean, I was highly respected. I used to dream like, oh, wow, we are those people that have arrived. Everyone hangs off our every word. And now people are being warned against me, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, don't be friends with her. I can't believe you're still in a relationship with her. She's going to lead you down the slippery slope. And then I say, come on to the water slide that leads to life. That's what but it's a loss that I really have had to grieve through. In my spiritual direction training, we do dream work. I've had crazy dreams about it and trying to unpack that and lean into that. I had one even just last night about my old church, and believe it or not, they saw me I came out of the shower and it was like my two pastors, and I barely had a towel to wrap around myself. And as I woke this morning, I thought, wow, there it is, naked and ashamed, of who I am now, or just trying to work through that. So it's a lifelong process. But I would say the thing that I learned, we were asked to step down from leadership because we wouldn't sign one of those documents that wasn't not an inclusive, it was an exclusive document related especially to the LGBTQ community. And we couldn't sign it we just couldn't. And so they said, you can still wave at people in the church parking lot, but you can't do this ministry you've been doing for 25 years. And it was really actually a good news for us because I'd been hanging on for so long and I didn't want to lose it. So it was something that was sort of taken away, but also I called the terrible gift. Like C.S. Lewis calls that, you have a terrible gift given to you. And it's been wonderful. And I think the biggest thing that's been wonderful to me is finding out actually who I do belong to.
Yeah.
That it's not the illusion of belonging according to some set of standards or rules. I actually belong. There are many people that I belong to no matter what.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like the illusion of control that we don't ever have. I think I had the illusion of belonging that I actually didn't have. So chosen family has been really, really big for me. I've learned that from Jesus on the cross when he defied everything and he said to John, behold your mother. And he didn't give it to his brother. I mean, chosen family. That was an example, like you said, sort of deconstruct because of Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean, that was so weird that he said that as he was dying, that he actually said that. So just the idea of chosen family and chosen friend, like people who I actually am in community with. And it's been weird, I think, on the church front, not to have something I go to every Sunday. But about 15 years ago, thanks to people like Rob Bell, thanks to an emergency room physician that wrote a book called 24/6, I started to take a literal Sabbath because I was a workaholic and had to do that on Friday. I was like trying to do it in weird times with young kids and am now able to do that on a Sunday. And it's like, I start with the Jewish time of day, 6:00 on Saturday night, go to 6:00 on Sunday. And I don't miss it. I don't miss church at all.
Yeah.
I wish I did, but I don't, because I feel like I'm able to go into much more rhythms for my soul than, again, internal rhythms, not external rhythms.
Yeah. Yeah. I talk a lot about the tacit beliefs, the like unwritten laws that everyone's agreeing on, and how you realize it just takes this tiny little domino falling, and it's like, oh, that person, never mind. That person that's a wolf in sheep's clothing. We need to put them over there on the outside. They're not right because they don't believe this exact thing that we never talk about, but we just assume that we all agree on. And that belonging feeling, that community that comes along with the church, so long as you don't exhibit this Sigma sort of archetype in your life, which is, I think, emerging big time in the human race. I feel like there's been almost like a genetic evolutionary need that's arising of the one that's like, forget this whole pack mentality thing. You guys, everything you're doing is just herd mentality, and we have got to look at other options, I think that that's so necessary right now when it comes to belonging in community. I know you said you don't miss church. I really haven't either very much, except for the structure it offers in terms of community for our family, for our kids. So are there any ways that you are addressing this need in your life? What are some recommendations you can give us? Because a lot of us struggle in this area big time.
Yeah, and a lot of people struggle with that same thing that come to us on our podcast as well. Yeah. I think one of the biggest gifts has been social media in its rightful place of being able to, a person who lives in, let's say, middle America, highly conservative, I'm thinking of a friend of mine, highly conservative environment. She's deconstructing. Oh no, what does she do now? And we have an online, I actually have 2 book clubs. I have an online book club there where we're reading inspired by, we're reading, by Rachel Held Evans. We're reading The Red Tent, which was like a bad book about divine femininity that we couldn't read in the 80s.
Oh, heaven forbid. Yeah.
We're reading Untamed by Glennon Doyle. We're reading all of these things, but we're actually in community. So I think the online space, if you can find safe communities, I think we offer that obviously in our deconstruction podcast. We have a community where there is safety there, but there are these pockets all over the internet. But as far as your own, that's only going to go so far. I said, as far as the people around you, I would say the one thing that I always have done in my life, which hasn't changed, which is a core of who I am and hasn't changed forever, is, and Brian McLaren talks about this at the end of his book, Faith After Doubt. If you don't have a community, create what you don't have.
Yeah.
You know, it is going to be requirement on your side to be vulnerable, to be scared, to reach out into weird spaces. I think people have found some helpful community within the Episcopal Church, within some of the mainline denominations now, which is just funny to me because I thought they were all just like good on Sunday people and terrible people when I was growing up, you know. And now I have found that a lot of people are finding good community. And I think those communities, are you okay?
Oh, I'm fine. Sorry. Somebody opened the door back here and I'm like, what are you doing? I'm recording.
That's fine. I do think that those spaces are offering more curiosity and ability to ask questions and go with doubts and things like spiritual direction that are not so dogmatic. And all the things I would have said to stay away from in the past, I would say maybe you could explore that in the future.
Yeah.
It's just funny to me when I think about it. But yeah, and I've, like I said, chosen family. It has taken me being vulnerable out loud and saying what I'm doing. And believe it or not, when you're vulnerable about loud, there's a lot more people out there than you realize.
Yeah.
And they're like, hey, what are you doing? Do you have somewhere for me to come? Do you have something for me to do? Can I be in a book club? I could have 20 book clubs because there's so much hunger and need for community.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think this is also the good news is it's beginning to change.
Yeah.
There was nothing 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And now there's a church like, I don't know if you know who Sarah Betsy is.
I have heard this name many times. Yeah. I need to check her out.
Yeah, so she has something called the Evolving Faith Conference, and now she stepped down from that. And guess what? A church in Cary, North Carolina, has picked it up. And I went to their website, and I was like, "Holy mackerel! Get down here!" I mean, it just was so interesting. But so I do think there's a major shift, and it's a hopeful shift in this direction that there will be more and more community.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I had a friend on the podcast a little while ago named Jenna Ocean, and she just interviewed a pagan priest, and she was saying in her episode, like, I don't necessarily want an organized religion, but I'd really like a little more organization within my religion, you know? So I think that space is something that you're right. A lot of churches are starting to kind of sense this, and a lot of pastors who felt like they couldn't say what they really felt are now feeling like they can. Like there's a community that we've started to attend close by, you know, and touching on that, you know, you talked about a friend in conservative Midwest, you know, there's no law saying you got to stay where you are. This is something that I'm not saying you got to pick up everything and move, but we have done that. And I can tell you, you know, we've noticed very real benefits in terms of the kind of people that we're surrounded with. You know, this is something that you can do. I'm not trying to give you any false hope or give you a prescription. I'm just saying, listeners, that if you've had this idea enter into your mind that maybe I'm just surrounded by the wrong milieu, even though they might be telling you, grow where you're planted, you know, this is where you're supposed to be. You need to learn how to be content. This is a spiritual value and it's you know, it might not be. It might not be. You might need to find a community, an actual geographic location where you can flourish. So that's just, you know, my 2 cents, a little feedback for you out there if you're going through this too. And we can create these communities, man. There's a lot of hope. I'm glad you said that. And
you don't have to have a big community. I think that's the big thing that all of the past mindset for me is it needs to be all this huge stuff. I have a group of 6 people, you know, 8 people. And I have found that that's really the right size. And now I'm getting to know their kids. Now their kids call me, you know, Esther, but they think I'm like their grandma, you know, and like I'm again, it's like chosen family, chosen community. Now we're sharing life together and I'm going beyond, but it's 6. It was started with like 6 women. And now it just seems to be like that. Now their families are involved. Now the guys are involved. Now it's just more and more. Yeah. And three of us went on vacation. My husband was with like 3 moms and their family. My daughter's involved in that, so she's part of it. It's kind of this crazy, beautiful thing there. I think that large mindset also can be something that we can lean into and say, do I need something really big?
Yeah.
Or can it be a small space?
Yeah. No, and in a lot of ways, the small space has massive benefits that the large one might not, because you get to kind of curate a more transparent and tight-knit, smaller group of people. And there are massive benefits to that. There's a reason why the churches have been pushing the small group idea for so long, because that's where this real community actually does happen. That's awesome. Okay. So just kind of landing the plane here. I've loved everything that we've talked about. I just love the path that you're on, and I think you have so much to offer. I wrote down your grand unified theory as like our last kind of landing the plane area, which you don't necessarily have to have one, but I've noticed that my podcast tends to follow like almost like a church service order, where it's like announcements, welcome and greeting, and then the body of the content, and then there has to be a resolution at the end. There has to.
Like you said, it's baked into your bones.
It is. It's in there, man. I got to do something about it. Not all movies have to have a happy ending. Anyway, so I would just say, for me, talking about Jesus being such an agent for deconstruction, do you feel that you still have a relationship with that figure, and that's still an important part of your life? How do you relate to Jesus now on the other side of all of this?
So when I was little, my favorite books were the Chronicles of Narnia. Mm-hmm. And I always joked that I loved Aslan more than I loved Jesus. And C.S. Lewis said, if you love Aslan, you love Jesus. So Jesus has been probably the thing that has really stuck with me. I've shifted a little bit of my view on Jesus. I'm not quite sure where I land, but I would say he's still the core of where I lean for the kind of person I want to be.
Yeah.
Inclusive, curious, loving. And here's where I would say fully human and fully divine. And I'm not quite sure if he is just the archetype of what it means to be fully human and fully divine and embracing that. And he's giving me permission, like, you can be this too. But I do feel completely safe in my relationship with him, probably because of that cozy childhood Aslan-y, take care of me kind of feeling. Yeah. And I do feel safe with both him as a historical figure and as a good friend. I don't know why. One thing that Christianity did for me, which is weird, is God the Father was the one that was all mean and angry, and Jesus was kind of like the nice guy.
Oh, yeah.
So it's been easier in my relationship with Jesus than, say, God, that Old Testament-y kind of like send me to hell God. I mean, Jesus got me out of hell. So how could you not love the guy? You know what I mean? Like, so I've held on, but I am shifting like what exactly he is, and what, if I would say that the incarnation of humanity and divinity, that's a beautiful thing. Mm-hmm. That's absolutely sacred, beautiful, and what I'm trying to help other people see about themselves, and what I'm trying to help myself see about me. So what a great model.
Yeah.
What a great model. I just don't have anything bad to say. I don't really have anything bad to say. I know that's not the same for other people, but that's kind of where I land. Yeah.
Oh, I'm in a very similar place. And I think that one thing that I've noticed is beliefs seem to be the device by which we are held in tribal patterns.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
Yeah. So, the beliefs, I'm not saying that on their own there's anything wrong with them, because there are certain things you just have to believe. You're just not going to be able to avoid it. But I think they need to be dethroned. I think they need to be brought down several notches in terms of how integrated they are with us and our identity, especially when we're talking about something like when you just said Jesus as an archetype for divinity and humanity coming together. That would seem to indicate to me that he is one with God, and that he realizes that, and that he invites you into that same relationship as a child of God. And this concrete thinking that we tend to have, I remember Ram Dass said it this way, that we have the mind and we have the heart. And the mind is addicted to its sense of separateness and to its separate self, into that identity. But the heart just keeps integrating everything and keeps bringing everything into itself. And for me, Jesus represents that near perfect, if not perfect, integration of those two ideas, and such a good model for us of that. So I love the way that you encapsulated that. In terms of like meaning structures, this is something like with AI on the scene, and with that's actually like a big, that's the biggest danger that I see for us right now, is losing our sense of meaning. It's such a huge part of what actually motivates us as humans. It's an emotional core that we have. We need to feel like we're connected to a purpose. How does that land on you now these days? What is your purpose? What does your meaning structure feel like as you've walked through this and navigated these waters?
Yeah, I think the best news of all for me, and going back to what we said at the beginning, is my meaning structure is for me to become and be my full, true self.
Yeah.
And when I am my true full self, healed, whole, integrated, like you just said, not separated, disintegrated, all these things, even understanding how the divine impacts me, all of that, it is going to change the world. I'm the only gift I have to give.
Yeah.
And when I'm separated from myself or disintegrated, or and even in my wounds that happens, then I'm not responsible necessarily for my wounds, but I am responsible for, and the breaking all apart, but I am responsible for the integration and the healing and the wholeness. And when I have that, I think about my relationship with my kids, to bring it back around to my kids, being able to give my full self to my kids.
Yeah.
I'm not doing that perfectly by any means. It's a lifelong journey, and allowing them to have their full selves. Nobody's hiding. There's no need to hide. Everybody's in this safe, secure space. I do feel like we're changing the world. I do feel like it is really what gives me meaning now. And I don't have to be on some grandiose mission. And within who I am as a passionate person who cares about clean water for the planet, I have all these little passions and inclusivity. I have these value systems within me. They're the same from when I was little to now.
Yeah.
Everybody said, "Oh, were you always inclusive?" I'm like, yes, I think I was. And then it was beat out of me and I had to be exclusive. So recovering all of those passions and those original desires that were taken away from me, just being like, I can actually lean into those now and do my part in one small way as myself.
Yeah.
And not as some random person that I was told to be.
Base note. Yeah. Yeah. And with how we've been indoctrinated, the self is just this very messy concept that has been formulated for us as a negative thing, as something that is broken, inherently sinful and bad. And I think that the more that we come to understand this era that we're walking into, where we can see scientifically that we are not separate from anything else in this universe. We can see it. It's literally true. It's not, it's a literal truth. If that's the case, then this self that we've been told is so rotten and evil, I think that we've just lost, we haven't understood the basics of what we are. We are this universe. We are all of this. We are you and me and stardust and everything in between. And so, that is the self. That is the self. And so we're not being selfish when we come and try to be our most full selves. We are living into the purpose of why we're here. So if you're out there and you're going through this journey and you're feeling that temptation to all this talk about self, and how the pastors have loved to tell you how filthy that is and how you can't trust it and the heart's wicked and deceitful above all things and all that good stuff, not good stuff. I just want to free you from that. You are pursuing what you should be pursuing. And I'm just grateful for work of people like Mama Esther over here, the Dolly Mama, bringing it home. All right. So speaking of bringing it home, encouragement, how would you encourage our people with the journey you're on and the kind of message that you have? What would be like a benediction? A pagan benediction, a heathen heretical benediction you could give our listeners?
I just think the bravest thing you can do is to become yourself.
Yeah.
It's hard work, but I will say the beauty on the other side, because what has happened to me like you said, we're not separate from others, is being able to see the beauty in everybody.
Yeah.
And I've moved from being afraid of other people to being curious about it. And I would not go back for the world, even as hard as the journey has been to get here. And I'm going forward into the unknown. So is everybody. And I don't know where the journey is going to take me. And I can't imagine that it will get worse from here. I'm not saying like, oh, I could get disease or whatever. I'm just saying my connection with self and God, I can't imagine it getting worse. I can only see it getting better because every step I take, it has just, I feel closer to God than I ever have before, and to myself, which I don't know, and to others.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I joke like my middle name is Jesus, others you, and I've got it now. I mean, just the idea of it, at least. It isn't a hierarchical thing. It's this centering circular kind of thing. You know? It's like,
yeah.
So.
It's no wonder that, like, you know, the idea of helping others to come more home to yourself, and that you can't help others until you're the fullest version of yourself, that those truths are so self-evident and so reciprocal, you know, because we're not separate from anybody else. And so, you know, meeting our own needs and then meeting the needs of others, that's huge. That's what life's all about.
Right. I will say one last thing too, is if you're worried you're going on the slippery slope, and I think I said this earlier, I view it as the water slide that leads to like life. When you go off the water slide, you fall into the depths of the ocean and you see things you've never been able to see before. And that water is teeming with life.
Yeah.
It's not a road that leads to destruction, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Well, good stuff, Esther. Hey, I think that does it. I just want to thank you so much for coming on board, for being on my podcast. And I love the work that you guys are doing. Speaking of the work you're doing, I would love for you to just kind of take a minute to shamelessly plug your stuff and let people know where they can find you.
Yeah, so there's two spaces that you can find me. One is the Deconstructing Mamas Podcast. That's on all podcast platforms. Actually, I'm not sure when this will air, but we have fall seasons and spring seasons, and we're heading into our 6th season. So there's about 60 episodes for you to listen to already on parenting and deconstruction and reparenting ourselves. And then the Esther the Dolly Mama space. I have a website called estherjoygoetz.com. My spiritual direction stuff's on there. I have 4 books I've written in that space. They're books of meditations in this weird deconstruction, holy humanity space called Wit, Wisdom, and Whimsy, Winter, Spring, Summer, Fall. But that's all on my website, estherjoygoetz.com and deconstructingmamas.com. Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Well, listeners, you know where to go. Check out
and I'm on the socials, obviously on all the socials.
All over the socials. Great. Esther Joy Goetz. All right. And I'll put all that stuff in the show notes. Okay. Esther, thank you so much for joining us, and blessings to you. Grace and peace.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Parenting through deconstruction. What a crazy feeling that is after you have been indoctrinated and just had dogma laid all over you by, as Esther called it, controlling religion. It's crazy what a strange feeling it is, and yet it's a very safe space. So I just want to encourage any of you out there who are going through this, that groundless feeling that you have, that's what we're here to examine, to step back from that, to look at what is driving that. Do you really feel connected to yourself? Do you really feel like you know yourself? Do you feel like your authority comes from inside yourself? Do you feel like your morality, your sense of right and wrong, your sense of justice, do you feel like it's coming from you, or do you feel like it's coming from outside of you? And you know, you're the only one that can answer that question. Everything we go through in life puts us in a place, and we are going through what we need to go through But if this message is resonating with you, and if you're really feeling it at the level at which I'm sharing it with you, then I would submit to you it's a sign that you need to investigate this inside yourself. You need to endeavor to figure this out and to see if you've been lied to see if the truth that you feel inside, that you know is true in your heart, if that's jiving with this authority structure, that you're so afraid to step out from underneath. Or, just from this structure in general. Maybe it doesn't feel like authority. Maybe it just feels like structure, and it feels like less of that when you're entertaining this idea. So I just want to tell you I respect you, and your choice is your choice. But, I can just tell you on the other side of this, it's safe. There's still love. God is still there. God doesn't go away because you stop believing everything that the church said and wrote down for you over thousands of years. You're going to be okay. John the Baptizer went out into the wilderness to hear from God, and you can do the same thing. So with all that in mind, let's take a minute to just meditate. I'm not going to send a demon into your brain. And if you've made it this far into this episode, you know that. I have a hunch you know that anyway. Let's just take a minute to slow down and to meditate. We're going to close our eyes if you have the time, if you are able. You can pause this podcast. You can come back to it later. Or if you're already in a quiet and relaxed space, feel free to go ahead and shut your eyes and just start breathing and focusing on your breath. You just breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. There is no pressure in this space. There's nothing to do. There's nowhere to be. You are just right here, breathing. You are inhabiting the present. You are a miracle. You're a human animal with a soul that connects to God. It's an incredible thing. Let's keep breathing and focusing on just being grateful for our breath. And as you continue to breathe, all I want you to do is just think about safety. If possible, I'd like you to try to realize safety inside yourself right now. You don't have anything to be afraid of. Everything that's happened to you has led you to where you are now, and it is a miracle. And the present is a space we inhabit where we can make new decisions and change our reality and really actually alter the universe to make it into the new moment, the new next thing, the new next present. So let's just continue to focus on that safety. Breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. And as you focus on your safety, just hear breathing. This is a space you deserve. You deserve to be here, to be safe, to be alone, to have silence. You deserve to have a calm mind. Keep breathing, keep focusing on that breath. And as we focus on our breath and think about safety, think about deserving the present, I want you to try to remember a moment when you were a child, when you felt safe. Is there anything that comes to your mind specifically? let's just take a minute to reflect on that feeling and on that phase of your life and just indwell it as best you can as you breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. And as you're breathing in and out and remembering how safe you are and remembering that time as a child that you felt safe, it's helpful for us to remember that those times in our life were the times when our consciousness was the least crowded. So a lot of times as children, that's why some of these memories are so formative on us, because our consciousness was filling so much of our mind. We were so present and so involved in what we were going through. So these memories are actually really useful. They're really useful to call up because they can fill up a lot of our consciousness again. And we can have more of a rounded out and enlarged version of these memories available to us as adults. So let's try to inhabit that space yet again, even more. Continue breathing. And as you were in that space, do you remember feeling unsafe? Do you remember having any question about whether you were okay, about whether you belonged? That memory, that moment, dispels that fear and dispels those questions. And that is a reality that I want to dawn on us now as much as possible. Nothing has changed. Your mind has become a little more complicated, but you still have these memories accessible to you, and you can inhabit the same kind of consciousness you did then. So let's breathe in through our nose, out through our mouth a few more times. And one more. You are perfectly safe. The present is a safe moment for you to inhabit. And I hope and pray for you that as you go through your life and as you reparent yourself and as you return to what it was like to be a child and as you nurture children of your own, wherever you are in life, whatever you're dealing with, that you would remember that safety and that you would remember to become like a child, like Christ reminded us. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Ground Podcast. I'm William Collier. I would love to connect with any of you further. If you need coaching and guidance on the next phases of your life, I am here for you. Grace and peace.